What's all this about an inland tsunami? A series of deadly floods hit the Australian state of Queensland starting in the summer of 2010, and culminating in what was described by many as an inland tsunami. A tsunami, or tidal wave as it is otherwise known, is of course normally associated with oceans and beaches. However, this Queensland tsunami was over 100 kilometers away from the ocean. It was devastating that the township of Grantham had to be relocated due to the mud-smeared remains of the old township being so devastated. If you are looking for proof of how dramatic this event was, consider this. The severe rainfall across Queensland resulted in a drop in world sea level by as much as 7 millimeters. The drop lasted for around 18 months and has been attributed to Australia's Archaic and Archaic basins, which soaked up the water previously evaporated from the oceans. So, how on earth could this happen? Well, in today's episode of What's All This, we are going to examine this.
If you're enjoying this video, make sure to hit the like button and subscribe for more content. Also, leave a comment down below about what you would like to watch next, and I will do my best to provide content you guys want to know about. Now back to today's content.
Introduction. In summer of 2010 and continuing into January of 2011, Queensland, Australia, faced one of its most devastating natural disasters of gigantic proportion, a continuing series of floods that swept across the region, affecting cities, towns, and rural areas. By January 2011, extensive flooding had impacted 75% of the huge state of Queensland, and a disaster zone was declared. In total, 33 people lost their lives, with 3 bodies never recovered and consequently declared deceased by the state coroner in June 2012. The floods forced the evacuation of thousands of people from towns and cities. At least 90 towns and over 200,000 people were affected. Among the hardest hit areas were Brisbane, Toowoomba, and the Lockyer Valley. Most dramatically, in the events that unfolded during this period not only left a lasting impact on the affected communities but also gave rise to a term that would forever be associated with the catastrophic flood in the Lockyer Valley, the inland tsunami. This is what we will look at today to discover what happened that led to this inland tsunami. Although today's episode focuses mostly on the inland tsunami, please be aware this was a small part of the 2010 to 2011 Queensland floods. Scale of the disaster. The economic and commercial impact of the series of floods was significant. Approximately 3,572 businesses were inundated. Damage initially was estimated at Australian $1 billion but eventually proved much higher at almost $4 billion. This encompassed the mining, agriculture, and tourism sectors. 19,000 kilometers of road were damaged, and 3 major ports significantly affected. Over 28% of the Queensland rail network was left twisted and displaced. 3/4 of the council areas within the state of Queensland were declared disaster zones. Communities along the Fitzroy and Burnett rivers were particularly hard hit, while the Condamine, Baloney, and Mary rivers recorded substantial flooding. An unexpected flash flood caused by a thunderstorm raced through Toowoomba's central business district. As the catchment system in downtown Toowoomba was hopelessly inadequate to contain the amount of rain being experienced, the rainfall from the same storm all collected at the same point and became a tsunami, a wall of water, a tidal wave, and devastated communities in the Lockyer Valley, which was located downstream from the elevated township of Toowoomba. The results, as we will investigate, were devastating for Grantham Valley residents. But the impacts on lives and the devastation extended so much further, as the body of water continued for days later all the way to the coast as it passed through thousands of houses in Ipswich and Brisbane, and along the Brisbane River, with many being submerged above the top of their rooflines as the Brisbane River rose to historic proportions. Volunteers were quick to offer their much-needed assistance, and sympathy was expressed from afar. A large mobilization of the Australian Defence Force was activated, and a relief fund created. The head of the Recovery Task Force was Major General Michael Slater. The Queensland Reconstruction Authority CEO was Graham Newton. Was formed to coordinate the rebuilding program beyond the initial task force. and a commission of inquiry was established to investigate all matters related to the floods. Evacuations numbers totaled 5,900 people from 3,600 homes. An estimated 28,000 homes were in need of rebuilding. Scores more would require extensive repairs. The final report of a judicial inquiry into the event was published in March 2012. The state's coal industry was particularly hard hit. How the tsunami was created. So how could it be possible for an inland tsunami to occur? To understand how the tsunami was created, one first has to understand the geography of the region. Toowoomba is a city located 100 kilometers from Brisbane City in Queensland, Australia. Toowoomba was established on the side of a huge volcanic crater. The city is found right at the volcano's edge in its mountain range with the same name as the city. Toowoomba mainly sits atop of basalts and associated rocks of the late Tertiary main range volcanics. Tabletop Mountain, located in Toowoomba, is the remains of a now extinct volcano that last erupted some 20 million years ago. The mountain itself has an elevation of approximately 596 meters above sea level, and has a height of 158 meters from the base to the top of the mountain. Due to this crater environment that Toowoomba is built on, think of it as a gigantic funnel. This cone shape is the perfect shape to collect water, but has a massive problem. The water all collects in small creeks and waterways at the bottom of the crater before traveling west and heading towards the Lockyer Valley. The creeks and waterways at the bottom of the crater are right in downtown Toowoomba. It has long been a contentious issue with locals that the catchment system is not considered adequate for high rainfall. What happened on the 10th of January 2011 was an unprecedented amount of rainfall. 160 millimeters of rain fell in 36 hours, which was already on top of a month's record rainfall. The second factor was the local Wivenhoe Dam. It had experienced unexpected rises in level prior to January 10, 2011. And this meant it was a catch-22 for the dam operator, which was the organization South East Queensland Water. On the one hand, if they released too much water, it would result in flooding. On the other hand, if too much rain was to fall, it ran the risk of overflow. It had no way of knowing so much rain was to fall. We will consider this controversy later. So for now, understanding the geography of Toowoomba and the local dam which had to release water is what led to the failure of the catchment system to cope. In addition to the water releases from the dam, the unprecedented rainfall cascading down the sides of the volcanic crater transformed the normally calm West and East creeks into raging, angry rivers. As residents drove down the roads toward the city of Toowoomba, the roads were already covered with 1 to 2 inches of water which covered the asphalt surface. When the roads became flooded, it became impossible to tell where the road became flooded by more than the 1 to 2 inches of surface water, because it all looked the same. As a result, the cars suddenly started floating away. This tragically led to the deaths of two people, mother and son Donna and Jordan Rice, after their car stalled in the rising water. Many more vehicles were washed away but were fortunately either not occupied or the occupants managed to escape. Once the wall of water swept through Toowoomba, it then accumulated further and traveled west, picking up speed and volume as it started flooding Lowood, Oakey, Dolby, Chinchilla and Condamine for a second time. By the time the flooding reached the Lockyer Valley, it was indeed a massive tsunami and hit Murphy's Creek, Postman's Ridge, Helidon, Grantham, Laidley, Lowood, Fernvale and Forest Hill. As the flood traveled on, it affected the main roading system from Brisbane to Toowoomba, with many sections of main highway ripped away, and of course the local river systems could not cope. Next in its pathway was Ipswich, Goodna, Gales, Crawley and then finally on to suburbs of Brisbane and all areas along the banks of the Brisbane River. Queensland Premier Anna Bligh said the flash floods are without doubt Queensland's darkest hour. The event that started in Toowoomba can only be described as a complete freak of nature. An extraordinary deluge that almost came out of nowhere, she said. By the time of the January 10th flood, in some cases residents of various areas had been flooded out up to 5 times within 3 weeks. Such as in the case of the residents of Dalby, where the entire township was underwater. Emergency services were hopelessly outnumbered by the number of calls for assistance. And it was not just the fact this was a record-breaking flood. It was also due to the vast expanse of devastation that emergency services were woefully outnumbered. This was not really due to a lack of resources. Queensland has a well-equipped and prepared disaster recovery unit. As one official commented, "How can you possibly plan for something of this nature that has engulfed such a massive and widespread percentage of the state of Queensland?" Despite the challenges, overall emergency services still held up well in the circumstances, with many acts of heroic rescue undertaken. There were many airlifts carried out from helicopters and others from inflatable rescue boats, rescuing occupants of cars who had retreated to the roofs of their vehicles, or others who were literally swept off their feet without warning and ended up clinging to trees for dear life. Some were on top of house roofs trapped and awaiting rescue. Adding to the issues was a failing communication system, as phone lines went down and mobile carriers were inundated with call traffic. Major General Michael Slater was appointed head of a civilian recovery task force. Slater was at the time also the commander of the 1st Division based at the Gallipoli Barracks in Inoggera, in Brisbane. The task force was later replaced by the Queensland Reconstruction Authority, a new organization which was created to coordinate the rebuilding program. About 35 state emergency service personnel from Australia's state of New South Wales and 20 personnel from the state of Victoria were deployed. A national appeal was established, with the state and federal governments giving $1 million each. The Australian Defence Force's contribution to flood relief efforts was called Operation Queensland Flood Assist. The Defence Force established a joint task force, based at Inoggera Barracks in Brisbane, for operational command on the 1st of January 2011. The deployment was the largest for a natural disaster since Cyclone Tracy. The nearby country of New Zealand offered to send to 15-member civil defence teams to assist. New Zealand also offered through Royal New Zealand Air Force Bell helicopters and a C-130 Hercules aircraft, and air transport. However, this offer was declined by the Australian government. In addition to this, New Zealand sent a number of New Zealand Defence Force soldiers, mainly engineers, as well as New Zealand Police and New Zealand Fire Service firefighters. A New Zealand Red Cross team was also dispatched. On the other side of the globe, the late Queen Elizabeth II sent her expressions of concern and sympathy for the victims of the floods. The Queen later made a donation to her Queensland Premier's flood relief appeal, as did her son, the Prince of Wales, who is now King Charles. In March 2011, Charles' eldest son, Prince William, toured the affected areas in Queensland, as well as those damaged by the floods in Victoria. Perhaps the most understated yet by far what can be termed as the backbone of the recovery effort is the more than 55,000 volunteers registered to help clean up the streets of Brisbane, with thousands more unregistered volunteers wandering the muddy streets with gumboots and mops, appropriately dubbed as the Mud Brigade. Prime Minister Julia Gillard said the volunteering effort showed tremendous Aussie spirit right across Queensland. The controversies, the blame game naturally started even before the floods were through. On the 17th of January 2011, Queensland Premier Anna Bligh announced a commission of inquiry into the 20,100 2011 Queensland floods. On the 1st of August 2011, the commission handed an interim report to Ms. Anna Bligh, and the final report containing 177 recommendations on the 16th of February 2012. As a result, the natural disaster relief and recovery arrangements forced Australian states to allow for disaster insurance. On the 8th of July 2014, a class action on behalf of 4,000 flood victims alleged negligence and nuisance against the operators of the dams, South East Queensland Water, Sunwater, and the state of Queensland. On the 29th of November 2019, the NSW Supreme Court ruled that the 6,800 class members, who ultimately joined the action against the above defendants, were victims of negligence. An order as to costs was expected to be made in February 2020. On the 26th of February 2021, the result of the legal action was a settlement of $440 million Australian dollars in compensation, sourced from the Queensland Government, Sunwater, and the state-owned dam operator South East Queensland Water. Later, South East Queensland Water won an appeal against the judgment in September 2021, it being deemed matters were ultimately beyond their control. Well, I can only imagine just how resilient Australian people after so much mud to clean up. And bear in mind, this is by no means the only flood of biblical proportions Australia has experienced. It is, however, unique given the inland tsunami that was deemed a freak of nature. So that concludes our look into this historical Australian flood and the inland tsunami.
Thank you for listening. Please join me next time when we will delve into another episode.